In 1431, a church court burned a teenager as a heretic. To convict her, it wrote down her answers word for word. 25 years later, another church court read that same record and declared the whole trial a fraud. The prosecution's own paperwork became the evidence that cleared her. This is the trial of Joan of Arc. She was born around 1412 in Domremy, a farm village on the edge of a France torn apart by war, with the north held by the English and their Burgundian allies. By her own trial testimony, the voices began when she was about 13, in her father's garden. She said they belonged to St. Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret, and that they told her to drive out the English and crown the Dauphin. At about 17, she reached his court, and within days of her arrival, the siege of Orléans was lifted. That July, Charles VII was crowned at Reims, with Joan standing beside him. A year later, she was captured at Compiègne by Burgundian troops and sold to the English for a king's ransom of some 10,000 livres. What followed was not a battlefield revenge, it was a trial. The judge was Pierre Cauchon, a bishop driven from his own diocese by the French advance, a committed partisan of the English cause, presiding at Rouen in English-held territory with English money paying the costs. A reluctant vice-inquisitor was pressed into sitting beside him. She was denied a lawyer, kept in chains in a secular military prison under English soldiers against church custom, and questioned for hours by relays of trained theologians. The questions were traps, asked whether she knew she was in God's grace, where yes was presumption and no was confession. The record says she answered, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there." The notaries wrote it all down. 70 articles of accusation were drawn up, then distilled to 12, resting on the voices, the male dress, and her refusal to submit her mission unconditionally to the court in front of her. She was shown the instruments of torture and threatened with the fire. On May 24th, facing the stake before a crowd, she signed an abjuration. The record contains a long formal document. Witnesses at the retrial swore the paper actually signed was a few lines in French, marked by a girl who could not read. What she signed and whether she understood it was disputed by the men who were there. Her sentence became perpetual imprisonment, and she was ordered into women's dress. 4 days later, she was found back in male clothes. The record says she resumed them by her own will, and that her voices called the abjuration a treason done from fear of the fire. Witnesses at the retrial swore she had little choice, that her women's clothes were taken, and that she feared her guards. Either way, the clothing alone made her a relapsed heretic. That was the technicality that permitted execution. On May 30th, 1431, in the old market of Rouen, at about 19, she was burned, and her ashes were thrown into the Seine. Witnesses at the retrial swore her last word was Jesus. Her king, who owed her the crown, had made no known move to save her. The record survived. In 1455, her elderly mother, Isabelle Romée, carried the family's petition into Notre-Dame de Paris, and the Pope authorized a new hearing. About 115 witnesses testified, from childhood friends to the notaries of 1431. On July 7, 1456, the court declared the trial tainted by fraud and manifest error, null and void, and a copy of the 12 articles was torn. Not a pardon, a ruling that the conviction had never been valid. In 1920, the Church made her a saint. This has been under oath.